Anita Nair, author, poet, playwright, mentor. She wears many hats as she weaves a spell with words rooted in real and imaginary worlds. In conversation with our Nama Bengaluru celebrity writer on her Ministry of Deceit is Naveen Kishore, publisher and theatre practitioner. Over to you.
We shall plunge straight into this. Anita has a new book which she doesn't have. And so we are very lucky in this sort of terrific, privileged festival to actually have a writer, author, poet who will share her vulnerabilities of the process, of how something called Ministry of Deceit, which came about. What does it mean? How does it evolve? What are we talking of? I had the privilege of reading some of these poems, and if you will allow me to set the stage as a frustrated theatre designer, I wrote a little text which leads into a question for Anita, who will, I hope, attempt to answer it, and then we will hear her read the poems. So here's what I wrote. Somewhere between the sheets of cream-wove parchment, she lay, waiting for thought to take shape, ripe, full-blown, secure, comfortable in the knowledge that before too long, the waters would break. The first wail, strong and full-throated. Later, you held her in the crook of your arm. Ginger, warm. Even later, you took upon yourself the loving task of nurturing her, watched her grow. Now, strong and independent, it is time for her to take her place in the world. Question. It isn't easy, is it, to let go, to abandon your muse child, your poem?
Okay, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Naveen, for being in conversation with me about this work in progress, which as of now is titled Ministry of Deceit. This has been a work in progress for almost 2 decades now, I think, because I've been writing poetry and I've been just putting them aside. Once in a while, there's been a poem that comes out, makes an entrance, and I read it out at probably an event, or probably it's published somewhere. But because I do so much of other kinds of writing, I think collateral damage has been my poetry. Because poetry requires a certain abandoning of self and everything else to be able to spend that kind of time and chisel it. Because I always say it's one of the hardest things to do is to write poetry, because how much do you put out there and how much do you leave unsaid? I mean, that's a decision that every poet has to make. And somehow, for whatever reason, I've been unable to find that kind of time to actually sit down and work diligently on my poetry, because for me poetry is very much, when I write it, it's a very emotional moment for me that drives me into writing poetry. It's never anything that is a rational decision like my prose, for instance, because there I have a story to tell, whereas here it's an emotion that I'm capturing. And obviously, emotions are nebulous things, so it's very hard to be able to capture it and then be able to know that it's ready to go out into the world. So it's that point where, since to take away from your metaphor, it's like the moment that you have the baby and you just want to hold on to it and not share it with anyone, because you've had it, you've accomplished it, but you don't want anybody looking at the baby, not saying anything about it. You just want to enjoy that precious moment together. But eventually, I will have to let go.
Wonderful, thank you. I have lots of questions, but I want us to focus on the unsaid, that which lies between the lines, or as actors know, the subtext of everything, or photographers know that what you leave out exists in what you keep in, and you get hints of it, and so on and so forth. And I think the best way to elaborate on the unsaid is if we get you to read, well, there's too many favorites, but the two I've chosen, Ministry of Deceit, followed by Gesture, with a little pause in between, and then explain to us why deceit and what it means when I say unsaid, because there's so much unsaid, even though you're saying a lot. Please.
So this one was is called Ministry of Deceit. And I remember quite clearly that I wrote it on a Sunday, so which is why it begins with a Sunday. Was it a Sunday evening when you left a window carelessly open? You rang first, that gong of betrayal. Was it one Wednesday, high noon, when you fed her bones of the lamb? You sang first that litany of duplicity. Was it a Tuesday under a moonlit sky, when your face flowered in surreptitious joy? You knew first that triumph of transgression. Was it under a kitchen light, as you lay bare fish bones of guilt? You exorcised first imprudent trust. A Saturday, a Monday, a Thursday, pearly light, yellow light in the dark. 86,400 ways exist to baptize the fool smug in the knowledge she will never be deceived. So this is a poem that I wrote some years ago. This was actually written for the Kochi Biennale and for a presentation there. And it came from a title that one of the installation artists had there. The installation was called "In Which a Small Gesture Becomes Epic." So with that title, I was asked to write a poem for them to support the installation. And I had to do my own take on it. And I think the word epic kind of roared in my head. And I said that I was going to go into one of the Indian epics and take a scene from there and talk about something which has always bothered me about that particular scene in the Mahabharata. So this is from Draupadi's point of view. I have a husband. Actually, I have 5. It so happened that one of them strung a bow and shot a fish swimming on a tree through its eye. He didn't look at all, except in a pool that shimmered. They took me home, a hovel for a princess. I said nothing, for love is like that. It makes idiots of us women, and I was just a girl. Tall, strong, seeds brimming their sacks, but such mothers' boys through and through. She had trained them well to heed and never proceed until she said so. Bloody cow. She sat within their mother. What secret thoughts, what hidden truths, what furrowed her brow, divided between all of you. Divided between all of you, she said, as if I were an effing hen. Wings for one, breast for another, legs for one, neck for the other, and a wishbone to tug on. I have a husband, actually 5, but all of this you already know. But now that I am to be stripped bare, let me tell you about them and men, for you can't not understand men a little when you have had 5 to handle. No, don't glare at me, you bloody cow. This is some of your doing. You brought up good sons, but not necessarily good men. As for you, Dushasana, you mega moron, let me save you the trouble. Let me peel away these layers on my own. This one is Yudhishthira, the wise one, son of Dharma, untainted, uncorrupt, forever right. The gentle tyrant rapping my knuckles. Draupadi, this doesn't befit you, a father teaching me how to be. You look away now, you coward. You do not want to get involved. Righteousness makes you smug. Righteousness makes you effing selfish. I still have 4 husbands. Which one of you will be there for me? Bhima, son of Vayu, the wolf-bellied wielder of the mace, you were the bumbling brother seeking to protect me from bee and behemoth, yearning to fulfill my whimsies. I see you wanting to rush to me. I see Dharma lay his hand on your knee. I see you, second husband, fall back. Arjuna, my Arjuna, son of Indra, my god among men, lover who feasted on my lips. You were the nectar I would never tire of. You won my hand, and now you forsake me with equal effortless ease. So I'm now left with 2 husbands. Nakula, my radiant dark husband, more handsome than any man living, hoarse whisperer, tender lover, the younger man who made me laugh. In you, I saw the bloom of a toy boy, all muscles, testosterone, and charm. But where are you now, Nakula? Or your twin Sahadeva, the all-knowing but bashful one, so much a child who needed me to show him how to be a man. When you ate your father's flesh, you knew, and yet you allowed this to happen. That I cannot forgive, Sahadeva. So here I stand, shorn of husbands and all I was. My name is Yagnaseni. I was born of fire. Your scorching gaze doesn't shame me. With a blue lotus, my fragrance is freedom. You can smell a yojana away. I was Krishna's Saki, but even that epithet I forsake, for I cannot be what you want me to be anymore. I open my hair, so you know. I erase the marks, so you know that I'm a woman first, a woman true, and everything only thereafter.
What can I say except quietly walk away and attempt to write poetry? Face to face, everything crumbles. Anyway, yeah, no, just to bring you back to what you were beginning to talk about, a certain kind of process, and in this particular case, the fact that you did this for a piece that was about to be installed, and so I'm just wondering about what if you hadn't done it like that, and what if these were true to life portraits? That you woke up one day and you had this urge. We have all had urge to rewrite fables, as we were talking about earlier. And can you bring in the autobiographical? Can you sort of step into a bit of vulnerability and sort of, as a poet, as a woman, as somebody who's written so much, and there's so much experience that has been lived and practiced, and hurt and loss and affection, all of that. It'd be lovely to hear about, portraiture. How does you create these dialogues? I mean, when you're reworking a myth, how much of it is you, especially your use of language is so contemporary there. You're trying to be unserious there by calling somebody a moron or this or that. But look at the issues of deceit that are at stake. So I'm just commenting to see if it rings a bell with you.
So You know, while I did write this poem for a particular, installation, I think this had been in my head, this poem had been lurking in my head for a long time. And it just, just fell into place when this word epic kind of popped up in front of my head. And I just remember sitting and writing this poem in one full stretch. It wasn't like I stopped at a point, I just wrote it. It's a long poem, and I wrote it in one full stretch. And then, of course, I went back and, worked on it and did the crafting. And because this was a performance poem, it was written to kind of, the cadence is actually that of a performance poem and not something that you just read for yourself in your head. I also find that when I do this kind of performance poetry, which is, when I say performance poetry, I'm not performing it, maybe somebody else is performing it. I always find that when I do these conversations, in the way that I write my poem, I somehow manage to kind of shrug aside my usual kind of sitting on the wall kind of attitude. And then when I write, it's like I just kind of don't worry about how it would be perceived and what would be said, etc. And I just write because there is this great need in me to write it down and to be able to write down something that is affecting me so deeply that I need to give voice to it. And that is how I think most of my poems are written. It's very seldom that I actually write a poem because I'm moved by a gentle emotion. It's usually a very kind of, overpowering and very strong emotion that drives me into writing my poetry. And this emotion is something that probably happens in my personal life. It doesn't matter, it could be, now it's not that every emotion that I go through in my poetry is something that I have actually gone through in my real life. But there is something similar, and that is what I mine into to be able to write the poetry that I do.
Thank you. That's perfect. I think if we switch track a little and if I can persuade you to read what I call your eating poem. Do you have it here? No, I don't. I'll give it to you. That can lead into this.
Or do you want me to do this edition?
I will. Sorry, guys. Here we are. I have to. Okay, I have to tell you the title of this poem. How Men Eat. You can clearly see I've missed writing these.
So, okay, there's a disclaimer here. I mean, when I read my poetry back to back, you might think like I'm this man-hating woman. I'm not, actually. I love men. But the only thing is I also have, I've lived with a lot of men, as in like I've always had a lot of men in my life, uncles, siblings and cousins and so on. So over the years, I think I've kind of made myself a little bit of an expert on watching how men eat. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to write this poem. So it's about how do you how do you find the right man? All you do is watch how he eats, and you'll come to this conclusion that I think I did. I watch men eat. The opening of the mouth, the curling of the tongue, the pouching of the cheek. I watch how they slice and spear, how they chew and swallow. I watch how men forget to pretend with food on their plate. All I need to know about a man, I find as he eats. Watch the man who picks at his food as if it were ridden with hundreds and thousands of rapacious weevils, each seeking to chew into him, daubing and probing. He litters the rim with suspicion. This is one you could befriend, but must never love. For fear holds him back in life. There is none more important than him. The man there who shovels in with gusto and relish each mouthful of what you lay before him, Life to him is a marrow bone, to suck and suck till dark flesh slides down his throat. Keep him, only for a while, for even as he glows with all he devours, soon he will pick every shred of your life and thought, licking you clean of your very being. There's more. None of this, now of this one be wary. He eats as if to eat is an act of faith, yet the plate is wiped clean. Now watch as he trashes the cook, the cauldron, and the stove. Malcontent and miserable, the food is ashes in his belly. Everything to him is an affront, a failure to measure up, and so will you eventually. There is the careful eater, taking only as much as he knows is possible, nibbling, savoring, never rushing, the deliberate boy who arranges his plate as if it were his tomorrow. Everything in its place. Marry him to your daughter, for he will love as he eats carefully. But for yourself, is that what you want? Often I would wonder if there would ever be one in whom lives a hunger to know food is more than food. So each meal is for him, as it is to me, the last meal on earth, to savor and relish. Would there be one with an insatiable appetite for love, for life, for more than what you can see? Wait, I see a man there whose hand seeks his mouth with no thought, no joy, just another thing to do. What monsters lurk within, what bleakness blear the edges. Then I see him reach. There is a page missing. For a plump purple fig, I see the mask of indifference split. I see the hunger for the sap, the flesh, the yearning to feast on all there is. What makes him hide his hunger for what could be his? Is it food he fears, or is it what love could be? I see then the furtive, greedy grasp, the northern lights of desire, the fig set ablaze in him. I could teach him to eat, as to love, I think. He will teach me to see, I think. He will teach me to be, I think.
Thank you. So we go from that disguised, biting humor, deceit, to something that is very topical, a whole different national deceit, which is a short poem, dear organizers. It's called Sedition, and we've just discovered it. Even she's just discovered it on her phone, and I'd like her to read that, and then we will end with a duet.
So this poem is titled Sedition, Sedition, Whatever. Look, young man, we don't care who you are. We don't care what you said. It's enough. You asked a question. Actually, you asked several, they said. So that's sedition, sedition, whatever. We don't like dissent. Actually, we don't like Dalits, Muslims, women breaking our rules, university students, human rights. But that's not for you to say. So that's sedition, sedition, whatever. There is only one divinity, what we know. There is only one right, a khaki-colored, kumkum-scented right. So your martyr's day is our murderer's day. The Constitution and tricolor aren't right. But that is in sedition, sedition, whatever. We have the power of Om and the goons, saffron to brandish, God-men as spin doctors, so we will clump your voice, break your spirit, and steal your breath. We will tell you what is to be said, or play dog.
And we almost end with something called the 12 Colors of Autumn, which is a eulogy for a friend who she will tell us about, whose name was Antonio. And I read this and I plunged into the fact that I so desperately wanted to read it with her, which she graciously allowed, so we'll do a paragraph each. They tell me that there are 12 colors to autumn. They tell me these are the colors you love. Sometimes I wonder why the child of spring found solace in these hues, when the air is laden with winter to come, and the grass crunches beneath feet, even as it waited for the hushed whispers, the serene waltz of the powder snow.
They tell me there are 12 colors to autumn, the sepia wave of the unshed tears, the silent brown of the blunted thorn. Instead, you allowed russet to prevail, the reddish-brown vitality of forever hope. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog leap, the lightness of the floating amber leaf, the vivid adherence of the gamboge, the scarlet swash of the bleeding heart, the crimson and carmine, deep purplish wounded red of a passion never spent, the maroon explosions of velvety dreams, the auburn glow you covered everything with. Autumn's color is lurid too. The yellowing bruises you tended to when no one looked, cornelian smears, that aching flesh wound.
They tell me that there are 12 colors to autumn. They tell me you're gone. They tell me you just went away. How could it be that you changed your path mid-stride? How could it be that there was no time for that last laugh? That you went where no one else could go with you?
And so, my compadre, wherever you are, may there be full-leafed clovers everywhere, many a mushroom for you to pick, fruit to magic into happy jars of mostrada, sticks to whittle, stories to tell. Around me is a leached lay, shorn and diminished, for the 12 colors of autumn you took away with you to that distant, forever place.
Thank you. To briefly share about Antonio.
So Antonio Carluccio was this very well-known chef, Italian chef. Those of you who are interested in food can just check him out. He used to have these shows on BBC, etc. And he was a very, very dear friend of mine. There was like, several years between us, but we were truly like the first time we met.
Thank you. We will end now with a small tribute to Anita's Draupadi. Surrounded by the whispers of gestures made helpless by accusations, she turned away, burying her face into the mouth of the wounded pillow. Having spent the first half of the night covering them with blood, and the second half washing the blood off them, in the morning she hung the sheets out to dry. She spent hours in the garden she had so lovingly grown, walking barefoot for days on end. Then, one day, without apparent reason, when the sun was at its height, she plucked the thorns from her feet and pierced the nearest white rose, petal by solitary petal, making them bleed. In the light of the sun on its deathbed, she sat, rubbing her hands, amazed at how red they looked. Thank you. Thank you, Anita. It's lovely.